In this video, I'm going to show you how you will be able to access the form and its element and start doing some validation on the form level and applying some events like on submit event to the form and being able to change the value of the form elements, like if it's a checkbox or ready button, drop down, and so on, right? Okay, let's go and start. I want to go ahead and create a form. And in this form, I'll simply want to go ahead and use the add an event on the HTML as an HTML attribute. So let's go ahead and create a few elements here. I'll go ahead and create an input box type text. I'll call it F name. I don't need the ID for now. And then I will create a submit button as well. So I'll go ahead and put submit. Okay. Now, for me to be able to access this form and validate it, I have to attach some instruction to one of the events of the form. So what can you do with the form? You can simply submit a form. So if I want to do HTML attribute, I can simply go ahead and say and submit equal alert 123. So we're just testing to see if our code works or not, right? So let me go ahead and open this on the browser. Here it is. Okay. So if I go click here, I can simply get the alert box and that form gets submitted, right? The whole idea here is to be able to validate the information before submitting the code. So my whole goal is to make sure that this text box is not empty. So for that reason, I'll go ahead and start adding the unsubmit event, and I'll call a function. So what I'm going to go do here, I'll call a function called validate, right? So let me go ahead and write the JavaScript function here, and function, call it validate, right? Now, in order for me to access that form and see if the text box F name has value, first I have to go ahead and get the form. Of course, I can use get element by ID to access that input box if it has an ID and so on, but I want to go from its parents, which is a form, right? So in order to access the form, as I showed in the previous video, I can simply go ahead and say document.forms, right? And if I give a name to this form, let me go ahead and do that. Name equal myFRM, right? So if I do that, I can simply do these few ways of accessing the form element. If I do forms, it's going to return me an array. I can say, give me the very first form in this document. Remember, this is in the order that you added the form. I can go ahead and put the name of the form right here like this, or I can use the dot notation, simply say dot myFRM, right? So if I do this, simply I'm adding the form element, the form object into a variable. So what I can do is I can go say let FRM is equal this, right? Now that I have access to this element, I can simply go through its element. So this is one way of doing this. Of course, another way would be to add an ID to the form, get element by ID, and so on. But what I want to do is, I want to show you another way of doing this. When we are return a form, in this case, the form, if it's considered an object, whenever I want to refer to this form, I can simply use this keyword. So if I pass this keyword as a parameter to a function, it means I'm sending this form into that function. So I just need a variable here. I'll call it FRM or whatever you want to call it, and I do not need this variable anymore. So in that case, I should be able to access the form as well. Let's just make sure it does work. So I'm going to say console.dir FRM. So if I go back to my form here, let me just open the console. So if I go and submit this, as you can see, it simply shows the value and disappears because the form gets submitted. So what I have to do is I have to stop the form from being submitted. So one way to do that is to return true or false based on the outcome of this evaluation or this instruction that you have here. So if I go here and say return false, I should be able to stop the form from submission. But this is not enough. Let me show you that. So if I go back here, I still can submit, same thing is happening. So one of the things I have to do, I have to go where I define the unsubmit attribute on a form and add a return. So in this case, I'm saying, okay, do not submit if the return is false, do submit if the return is true. So now if I go back and do this, I can see that the form is stopped, I can see the value of the form, and everything is there that I need, right? So let's go ahead and see, now that I did this, I should be able to simply access the text box. So how would I access the text box? If you remember, I can say dot elements, right? This gives me all the elements, and then I can go dot 0, which is the first element, or I can use the name in this case, right? Just keep that in mind. I have access to the whole element here. This is the input box as an object. I can access any of its attribute as well. Another way of doing this is, instead of writing all this, I can simply go ahead and say frm, because I already have the form dot fname. So if I do this, now that I have the input box object, I just need to go and get the value attribute. So in that case, if the value is something in there, I'm going to print it. Otherwise, it's going to be empty. Let's go ahead and try that. So I'm going to go ahead and submit now. I get empty value. I type test, and I can get the test, right? Well, if I have access to the value, I want to make sure the value is not empty. So what I can do is I can simply go ahead and say, you know what? If this is equal empty string, then do this. What is that you want to do? Perhaps you want to say alert, first name cannot be empty, right? Something like that. And since this is the information that you want to stop the form from submission, I can go ahead and say return false. If I do so, I simply have to go and say return true at the end. So in case, if the form has valid data, I should be able to submit it. If not, then I should not submit the form. Let's see if it works. So I'll go ahead, submit, let it refresh first. So I submit, okay, I get the message, first name cannot be empty. I go ahead, put the information in there, and simply it does submit the information. So now, of course, there are many other ways of doing this. Like for instance, you could create another variable here called let is valid and make it false at the beginning, right? Or true at the beginning. Let's do it this way, true, right? And then here I can go ahead and say is valid is equal false, right? And then here I can simply return the flag is valid, right? So this is another way of writing it, but at this time I have validated the text box. I'm sure that is not empty, so simply I can go on and submit the form if everything is okay. So next I want to go ahead and add a checkbox here. So let's say I'll put an input box checkbox, and I want to make sure this checkbox is checked before the form gets submitted, right? So I got it must be checked. Okay, that's a name. Now let's go ahead and validate this together. So remember, we do have the form inside the function. We know the name of the input box. I have to just simply go ahead and write another validation. So of course I can use else if I want to show one error at a time, or I can create a string, append all the errors, and at the end show that one. There's so many ways of doing this. So I'm going to do else if for now to just get one of them at the same at any given time. So I'll go ahead frm, and if you remember, the name was must be checked. Okay. So if you remember, when we have a checkbox, right? Let me just comment this. So if I go back to my browser, if I want to access this checkbox, I can simply go ahead and write here. Let me go ahead, form dot my form, right? I believe I can do it this way too. Let me just check that my form. Yes, I can do that too, right? Look at this. So I can say my form dot must be checked. Let's see if we get that. Yeah, we get the checkbox. And the way you check a checkbox is by just checking if it's checked or not, right? So if I do this, checkbox is false, right? And I check it and go back and run this one more time. Let me just go ahead and clean this part. So I'll go ahead and this time I check it's true. Now if I want to uncheck it, I can simply go ahead and say is equal false, right? Or I can say is equal true. right? Here it is. Let me show you something. I just go here. This is what I have. So I'm going to say document.myfrm must be checked, which is the current status, is on the left side of the equation. So I just want to go ahead and change that one. Let's see what happened now. I put the not at the beginning of the same statement. Simply I'm saying if is true, make it false. If is false, make it true. Look at this. So I can simply change the status this way as well. So I just wanted to show you that. Okay, let's go back here. I will go ahead and do else if. Now I'm saying I'm accessing the checkbox. I can simply go ahead and check the status of the check. Of course, I can go ahead and say equal false, or I can simply go ahead and negate this. I can go ahead and not checked, right? So if that's the case, I'm going to print an error message, very similar to what I did for the first name. Right, this time I'll go ahead and say, you know what, checkbox must be checked. Okay, and return false. Let's go ahead and check this. So if I come over here, submit this, I'll get the message, first name cannot be empty. I'll put something in. Checkbox cannot be empty. Check the checkbox, submit, everything looks okay, right? So that was about the checkbox. Very similar to the radio button as well, with one difference. We have to remember radio buttons are arrays, right? Because we named them the same in order to create a group or collection that only one can be selected. So let's go ahead and do that. I want to go ahead and show some radio button here. Input radio. So I'm going to go ahead and call them. I call them R to just make it simpler to name them. So I'm going to put a few of them. Let's say I'll put 4 of them, right? So if I go back to the console, let's see if I can get access to those. So I can go ahead and say document.forms. I use different versions, so you know which one to use, whichever you prefer. Just with when you're indexing it, when you use the number to access the array element, just keep in mind that whenever you change the form position in the document, this will not apply to the first one that you were having it at the first time. I hope you understand what I mean. So here I'm going to go ahead and say dot elements, right? And I simply go ahead and put R here. So if I do this, I'll get all the elements too, or I can simply go ahead and do this, right? Let me see, elements dot R, right? So here. So I can get all of them right now. Of course, if I have something like that, I have the length as well. So what I have to do is I have to loop through this and see if any of these is checked or not. So that's what I want to do. When you submit this form, at least one of these radio buttons has to be checked. So let's go ahead and do that, okay? So right in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check that one. So how would I go about this? Let me see. I go ahead and create another else if, and I say radio at least one radio is checked. Okay, so I'm going to create a function this time. It makes my life easier this way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send the frm dot r in there, dot elements dot r in there. Okay, does that make sense? I could send the whole fr. It depends what is that you want to do. So let's go ahead and create this very long name function. I'll just go ahead and say function, and then I have radio. Okay, radio. I just go ahead, put underscore in case if it's a keyword. Right? So now that I have this, I just go and say for let I is equal 0, I is less than radio dot length, right? And I also do like I++. Okay, so if this works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable to keep track of if any radio button is checked or not. So I go let is checked is equal false, right? So as soon as I come over here, I will simply go ahead and say if underscore radio at I dot checked, right? If that's the case, simply can go ahead say is checked is equal true, or why would I go through the whole loop? Because I just want to know if one is selected, right? So I can simply go ahead and break this if that's the case, or I could just return, whichever you prefer, right? I could return, or I can do it this way. So I'm saying breaking this loop, it is true, and then at the end I will just simply go ahead and say return is checked. There you go. Let's see if that works, right? So what I did is I'm checking this one. If this one send me false, then I have to show an error message. So I'm going to put this one in. You must select at least one. Let me just change this one. You must select at least one radio. Okay, option. Okay, so that I did. Let's go back to things. I hope it works. So I'm gonna come over here, submit. Still name works, so I'll put test in there. My checkbox does work, right? And come over here, you must select at least one radio option. So I'm gonna go select, submit, everything works like a charm, right? So I have validated that. So as you can see, getting these elements, I can simply go through them. And remember, as soon as you get the object, you can access its attribute and you can change them the way you want to. Okay, let's go through another one. I want to put another form element, a drop down, and see what are the things we can do with that one. I'm going to add the form element right in here. Let me just put in the horizontal ruler here so to have a line between the elements. So I'll go ahead and add a select. I'll call it my options, right? So now that I have this option, I add this value, let's say is 1, and this is item 1. I'm going to add another one, option, this is 2, and item 2. Okay, with 2 I think is enough. We can, if it works with 2, then it's going to work with 1,000 hopefully. So I have these two, right? So what I want to do is this. Let me add an empty one. I want to show you something else too. So I'm going to go here and I say option, and this time make it 0, and I will say select an option. Okay, so let's put this one, make it a little bit fancy. So if I come back here, make this one a little bit bigger so that way you can see it easily, right? So here it is. So as you can see, I have the label on the thing, and I want to make sure when you click here, this gets submitted, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So what I want to do is this. On submit, I can do that. Remember, all these elements, like for this one, I can say on change equal alert 1, 2, 3. Let me show you this first. So if I go ahead here and change something, the alert box fires, right? So I can simply do on change event trigger and see what's going on with the thing. The other one I can do is if I go here and I say my frm dot elements dot my options, right? I can get everything. Then I can say options, sorry, I want to see how many options it has. Options, right? So if I do that, I'll get the collection. Of course, I can go ahead. Let me just make this one as bigger so you can see it properly. So here, I can go ahead and say dot length. So I can get this one. I can get the very first option if I need to, right? Do you see that? And I can go ahead and say, give me the value, or I think it was text. Here you go, yeah. So I can access either of them if I needed to. I can even do this option dot selected index. It tells me which option is selected, right? Let's do it one more time. So this is option 2. If I go back here, run this, I can get 2. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. Now that we have all this, I can do a lot more about this as well. I just want to go as simple as this now. There are so many other things I can do with the select, but I just want to be brief on this so you can quickly get understand how to work with these things. So let's go ahead and write a validation for this as well. So I'm going to go ahead and say else if frm dot let me see, what do they call it? frm dot menu option. What did they call it? I forgot. Let me get the name for it, please. So I'll call it my options. Okay. So come over here and say frm dot my options dot selected index right? Remember what we did here? Selected index. So I'm going to say selected index is not equal, is equal 0, sorry. Equal 0. Again, remember I can do negate this one as well. I can put not at the beginning and remove that. But this one I'll leave it so for a sample that you can do different ways of defining 0 is 0, right? Or is false or is invalid. So here I'm going to say alert, you must select one option. Okay, so if I do that, is valid is equal false, right? So if I go back now into my code and I know all this works, but I do one more checking, right? So I select the radio. Oh, it didn't work. Let's see what is the problem here. So if I go back here, oh, here it is, index, right? Let's go back again. So I put the test, this one, and then submit. Here you go. You must select an option. So if I go simply select an option, right? Remember the unchanged event still is firing. It can submit everything. I hope you enjoyed the video. That's all for this video and being able to access the form element. As long as you understand the concept of how you traverse through the DOM and access different elements, you should be okay to do to write a JavaScript to access any other element in the form. Thank you for watching and have a good day.